Kaliningrad has been cut off from Europe again, but this time it's not the lights going out. It's something far more critical. Lithuania has just moved to block rail shipments from mainland Russia. Fuel trains that once kept the region running are now arriving half empty or not at all. And for Moscow, this is more than an inconvenience. It's a geopolitical chokehold on one of its most strategic outposts. Welcome to Europe's newest flashpoint, a place where supply chains, sanctions, and strategy collide. On October 31st, Lithuania announced a move that stunned the Kremlin. After decades of cooperation, Vilnius declared it would halt the rail transit of Russian petroleum products. The statement sounded technical, but it effectively severed a key energy artery to Kaliningrad. The Kremlin immediately accused Lithuania of hostile actions. Officials in Moscow framed it as economic warfare, disguised as regulation. But Lithuania's message was clear: no more humanitarian exceptions for fuel from sanctioned Russian firms. This wasn't spontaneous. It followed a two-year progression of Western sanctions targeting Moscow's energy exports. In 2022, the EU banned Russian oil transit, but carved out humanitarian exemptions for Kaliningrad. That loophole kept trains moving for a while. Now, it's gone. According to Lithuanian Railways, or LTG, the phase-out was gradual. In 2024, the line carried 371,000 tons of Lukoil fuel to Kaliningrad. By mid-2025, that number had dropped to 194,000 tons. After October 31st, it fell to zero. The tap was off. For the Kremlin, this was a logistical nightmare. Kaliningrad depends entirely on those supply lines, and winter is closing in. To understand why this tiny enclave keeps making headlines, we have to go back, way back. Kaliningrad wasn't always Russian. Before 1945, it was Königsberg, the capital of East Prussia. After World War II, Stalin annexed the region, expelled its German population, and filled it with Soviet settlers. For decades, it thrived as a military hub behind the Iron Curtain. But the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991 changed everything. Suddenly, this once central outpost was marooned. When Lithuania and Poland joined NATO and the EU in 2004, Kaliningrad went from Soviet fortress to geopolitical orphan, a Russian province cut off from Russia itself. Today, it sits wedged between Poland and Lithuania, both NATO members, and just miles from the Suwalki Gap, one of the most militarized corridors in Europe. Every barrel of fuel, every loaf of bread, and every spare part must travel through foreign territory or cross the Baltic Sea. In short, Kaliningrad survives on logistics that Moscow doesn't control. That paradox, military power built on fragile supply lines, defines the region's entire existence. Kaliningrad isn't just a naval base. It's home to nearly 1 million people. They live in apartment blocks, shadowed by radar towers and missile silos. Shops share freight corridors with armored trains. All that firepower, the Baltic fleet, the Iskander missiles, the radar systems that guard Russia's western flank, needs constant maintenance and steady fuel. When those trains stop, everything stops. Lithuania's blockade hit that nerve. Officials in Vilnius say they're only enforcing EU and UK sanctions, but to Moscow, it looks like weaponized geography. Poland has tightened freight inspections as well, slowing cross-border cargo from Belarus and Russia. Together, those two choke points have throttled Kaliningrad's lifeline. Before the shutdown, nearly 40% of the enclave's refined fuel arrived by train from Lithuania. Rail was faster, cheaper, and far more reliable than sea routes. Now, logistics have slowed to a crawl. Each ton of diesel shipped by barge across the Baltic costs Moscow twice what it did a year ago. And every extra ruble spent keeping Kaliningrad running is a ruble not spent on the front lines or at home. Behind closed doors, Russia's finance ministry has issued new regional resilience credits, bureaucratic code for keeping the lights on at any cost. The enclave, once a showpiece of strength, is turning into a budget drain. Fuel shortages have rippled through daily life. Delivery schedules have collapsed. Prices have risen sharply, in some cases approaching 40% in some categories, local estimates suggest. Lines at gas stations stretch for blocks. Factories dependent on lubricants or diesel are slowing production. Fishing fleets remain docked because refrigeration can't be guaranteed. City buses now run reduced schedules. Hotels and small businesses are rationing heating oil. Everyday life is turning into a waiting game. Moscow's reaction was immediate and loud. Russian media framed Lithuania's move as a NATO-backed blockade. Officials accused Vilnius of trying to strangle Russia's western frontier. The foreign ministry called it economic aggression. Energy giant Lukoil denounced it as politically motivated. And yet, behind the rhetoric, Moscow faces a math problem it can't solve. Shipping by sea is technically possible, and ferry traffic increased after the cutoff, according to port officials, but ferries are slow, expensive, and hostage to weather. One Baltic storm can halt everything. Winter makes it worse. Ice locks ports, and icebreakers can clear only limited lanes. That's why the Kremlin invested $300 million in 2019 for the Marshal Vasilevsky, a floating LNG storage and regasification unit. It can unload 2.7 billion cubic meters of gas per year, enough to power the region, but only if tankers can reach it. This winter, the Baltic froze early. Only a limited number of shipments reached the terminal in November, barely covering 12 days of supply each. Storage tanks are capped at 75% to leave space for emergencies, meaning Kaliningrad's buffer lasts roughly a week. Officials still insist the terminal guarantees energy independence. In truth, it guarantees weather dependence, and this year the weather isn't cooperating. Moscow's alternative route through Belarus isn't much better. After a bizarre series of balloon incidents in October, smuggling operations that crossed into Lithuanian airspace, Vilnius shut down 5 of 6 border crossings with Belarus. Only one remains open, restricted to diplomats and pre-approved cargo bound for Kaliningrad. Within days, freight through Belarus dropped by 2/3. Trucks idled for hours, burning fuel they were supposed to deliver. Ferries tried to pick up the slack but couldn't. The system strained. Kaliningrad now faces effective isolation, by land, by sea, and by weather. There's still one lifeline left, the gas pipeline. It runs from Belarus through Lithuania into Kaliningrad. The current 10-year deal, signed in 2015, expires on December 31st, 2025. And with that deadline approaching, negotiations have turned tense. Lithuania's state operator, Amber Grid, wants higher transit fees and a shorter renewal period. It currently earns between 12 and 20 million euros a year moving Russian gas. Now it's signaling it wants more, or it might walk away. President Gitanas Nausėda put it bluntly, there's no reason not to extend the deal if it benefits Vilnius. Translation, Lithuania holds the clock, and Moscow has to pay to keep it ticking. The European Union is quietly backing that stance. Lithuania was one of the first EU states to cut off Russian gas imports after 2022. It has no appetite to give Moscow a discount now. For Kaliningrad, the stakes are existential. Power plants, heating systems, and factories all rely on that gas. If the deal collapses, the region faces blackouts, frozen homes, and a humanitarian crisis on NATO's doorstep. And the Kremlin knows it. Building new infrastructure would take years. Shipping LNG across the Baltic is slow and costly. So while the gas still flows today, it's not a guarantee, it's a countdown. Lithuania controls the tap, and every cubic meter has become leverage. For ordinary people, geopolitics has become personal. Fuel prices are up, groceries scarce, and tempers are rising. Factories miss deadlines. Families delay purchases. Younger residents scroll social media and see how different life looks just across the border in Poland or Lithuania. Older residents, many loyal to Moscow, face the same empty shelves. Frustration is universal. Kaliningrad was supposed to showcase Russian resilience. Instead, it highlights Russia's dependence on fragile supply lines. Even with missiles and fleets, power means little if you can't move fuel, feed civilians, or keep the heat on. Zoom out, and the symbolism becomes clear. Kaliningrad is a mirror. It reflects the limits of hard power in a connected world. The Kremlin wanted it to remind Europe of Russia's reach. Now, it reminds Russia of its own limits. Sanctions, geography, and climate have converged into a perfect storm, one that no amount of military hardware can solve. For officials, energy has become a front line. Kaliningrad isn't collapsing, but it's cornered. Fuel is scarce, ferries delayed, and pipelines uncertain. Each day of disruption chips away at its stability. What began as a regional dispute has become a test of endurance between Moscow and the West. The question now isn't who wins the propaganda war, it's who can keep the lights on longest. Because in the end, real power isn't measured by missiles or rhetoric, it's measured by what a nation can sustain when its lifelines are cut. Kaliningrad once embodied Russia's strength. Today it exposes its fragility. And the longer those engines stay silent, the louder that truth becomes.